Hi, welcome to episode 10 of Known Through Connection. Known Through a Connection is where we value presence over performance. Not that performance isn't important, but connection is built through presence. Presence is where we get to interact, get to know each other, get to know ourselves. And Known Through Connection is a way for us to connect with people like Bridget Knaub, my guest today. I'm so excited to have Bridget. We have a history together, and now we're starting new lives professionally, and it's an opportunity for us to come together and talk about what we're seeing. Bridget, thank you for joining today. I can't tell you how happy I am to have you on Known Through Connection.
Thanks for having me, Jess. It's really been great to have reconnected with you in this new professional journey that we're both on. I think we've known each other for, gosh, I was trying to remember, almost 5+ years it's got to be, right?
Really?
From
Yeah.
our previous, work environment. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have me here today.
Awesome. So glad to have you. It is so fun. Talking about Known Through Connection, just to kind of talk through our connection.
Yeah.
Our connection right now looks very different than it did a year or 5 years ago. In a previous professional life for both of us, you were my client.
Yes.
I was in a consulting world and you were the client sponsor. And when Bridget showed up, I had to make sure I had my stuff together, so to speak. And, now we're at a place where, we've reconnected after I've gone through some professional changes. You've gone through professional changes, and I'd love to give you a minute to kind of share that with people who are interested here in a second. Um, but it's so fascinating to me that you and I both are going through a tremendous amount of change while I think society's right on the front side of a lot of change, right? And that's partly what we're here to talk about. But I want to tell you, if you had told me even a year ago, that I would be down this entrepreneur on my own path. I would have started a podcast. I would have reconnected with you as a friend, not just a client sponsor. You would have been a guest on my podcast. We would have been talking about AI. I'll say it in a very understated way. I wouldn't have believed you.
You know what? I
So
agree.
yeah, life is so funny, and yet one of the treasures out of this season of life is to be able to connect with you and be able to have the conversations that really formed the catalyst for having this podcast episode, or potentially two episodes here. And I really appreciate the ability for us. It's not even the ability. It's not like we even try. I just really appreciate when we met for coffee, just to reconnect and dialogue on what each of us is doing. It really just started this discussion of daydreaming and wonder and thinking through what are things going to look like moving forward. And I really appreciate, Bridget, the background that you have, that you bring to things, and yet the Bridget who is human and who cares and wants to connect and is so personable. And I just love that combination, and it brings together the type of conversations that have just been so encouraging and inspiring for me as we talk about AI and where things are going. Do you want to share,
Yeah.
for those who don't know you, maybe, or maybe those who have been watching from a distance over the last year, kind of where you're coming from and what you're doing now, just to kind of set the stage?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I certainly echo everything you shared there. Yeah, so as you kind of explained, part of my past career journey was to serve as a software team leader, essentially. So I worked for a local organization, and I was responsible for leading a lot of our digital enablement activities. So our customer facing website, a lot of the email marketing and those types of things that happen to engage with our customers. So as you can imagine, right, in that type of a role, having a good understanding of what things like new technologies or what an AI enablement could mean for our organization, it was constantly on my brain, right? Ever since probably, gosh, like 2022, I think it was. And so it was a lot of learning from my perspective and trying to understand, how can this new technology, make the world better for our customers, but also help our internal employees. Um, As you pointed out, though, I had quite the shift. So, it was, gosh, May of 2025, so May of this year, for a number of different reasons. I made the choice, along with my family, to leave that career. I left it in a great place. I was super happy with what I had achieved. Right, left in a good tone, but decided to pick up a whole new journey. So I actually am now a real estate agent with Better Homes and Gardens. And I have the pleasure of supporting my fellow Nebraskans in a new way now. So my intent is to connect people, buyers and sellers, with the home that really enables and enhances their lifestyle. And when I think about a lot of the connections in terms of, what I did in my past as far as looking to achieve a goal and really help the customer in my mind meet what they were aiming for, it's really similar, to what I'm doing today. I'm trying to, give someone the goal they're aiming to achieve, and whether that home is, or excuse me, whether that goal is, home ownership or selling a home or potentially both. There's so many synergies that connect, and in the same way, Jess, it's been crazy because, as you know, tying in that AI piece, right? There's AI everywhere. I mean, we're all feeling it, we're all seeing it. Gosh, you turn on a football game, right? They're talking about Watson and IBM, or golf. Watch golf, you see it, right? Doesn't matter what you do, it's
Yeah.
kind of in your face. And what's been really cool for me is my lens has shifted.
Hmm.
So the lens I had in my previous world, in terms of how I was looking to, potentially utilize and enable the AI environment, has shifted a bit, and it's been eye opening for me because it's allowed me to really expand my lens, I would say, and
Hmm.
really understand, what does this mean not only for me and my new career, but what are my other fellow realtors feeling about this, and what are they thinking, and
Hmm.
how do I set this up an environment for my children and my family. So I bring that background of having the kind of hands-on experience, right,
Hmm.
to this new environment, but there's so many synergies and connections that I'm recognizing along the way.
That's interesting, Bridget. I was thinking I was going to say, you bring an interesting lens, I think, at this moment because you were the way I was framing it in my mind is you were in technology.
Mhm.
Now you're not in technology yet. Is that even? Can I even say that anymore? Is there anything that's not? Do you think is anything going to be not in technology? Is that even a thing?
It's a really good question. It's a good way to
Yeah.
put it, because you can't really survive if you're not in technology, even if you're not utilizing and allowing a technology to enable you in some way.
Hmm.
That's the kind of the chatter around our office is, what tools are you utilizing to ensure you're being the most efficient and effective that you can? So to your point, you know, you have to have it. You have to use some platform to make yourself more efficient and to make yourself more available for your customers in the way you want to be.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think more and more that is just the case. And I've seen my wife, who historically in the past, I won't say shied away from technology. I think she grew up on a farm and she just wasn't that wasn't how she got. She likes to do things. She likes to physically do things, right?
Hmm.
And she would lean on me for a lot of technology. And now she's in a place with her current employer where she has fully embraced technology. She's using AI to help her with her job, and it's just so interesting to see that happen naturally. And I think as technology and especially AI makes if you engage with it in a certain way, it's more approachable for people who, I don't want to talk in code. I don't want to talk in these weird programming things. I just want to dialogue, right? And I think it makes it approachable now to where you can leverage a lot of the capabilities and technologies more and more just through um, normal, what we would consider normal communication.
I was going to piggyback on that a little bit because I think you're so right. It's incredible. It doesn't matter where you fall in the spectrum of, being advanced, quote unquote, in any technology, right or not. The technology itself has the landscape has shifted to allow anyone to engage in any way they can, which I
Hmm.
think is so cool,
Hmm.
right? So to your point, it doesn't matter if it's your wife in this example, or if it's my kids. You don't
Right.
have to be the expert, but if you want to dabble and do something, there's a way for you to do that now.
Yeah, it's so approachable now from a what's possible
Mhm.
as long as I'm seeing in my circles, as long as you're able to mentally be comfortable with that, oh, I'm working with AI. Some people are still, I've noticed in my circles, even recently this week, some people are like, I don't want anything to do with AI.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay, okay, I get it. I understand where that's coming from. Yet, man, there's so much that you could be doing. I want to ask you, Bridget,
Yeah.
as you're going through career change, you're changing, you change not only quote unquote jobs, you change industries, right? You
Mm.
change posture. You were a senior, I'm gonna say you were an upper senior technology leader in a corporate environment, and now you're completely down on the ground, I'm gonna say.
That's valid, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm fresh.
yeah. And completely down on the ground, like boots on the ground, doing the hustle. And I'm right there with you. I mean, you were more established than I was for sure, but we're both at a place where like, okay, we got to be changing our perspectives,
Mhm,
throwing off things that worked for us over here, are going to hold us back over here, at least in my opinion,
mhm.
right? And so you and I are going through a lot of change, and like we talked about earlier, I don't know if everybody realizes it yet. I think so. I think they're feeling the implications through disruptions in employment and things like that. But I think society is changing or is going to change quite a bit. I will tell you, I kinda keep up on what's going on with AI to an extent, at least not necessarily in all the nuts and bolts, but more at a high level and at a broad stroke level. Um, how how are you viewing the pace of change right now? What's your view of how fast things are moving? What's your sense of that?
Oh gosh, yeah. It's a really good question because like I pointed out earlier, you kind of have to be living under a rock not to know, right, this new world we're in, so to speak. Yet, I also think there's a valid point you make that says if you choose not to, get super engaged, we're also at a point where you don't have to yet, right? The
Yeah.
change is happening quickly, but yet if you don't want to engage with any kind of an AI platform or generative AI experience, you're still okay. You're still don't have to in some
Mhm.
places.
Mhm.
My curious question though is what's that tipping point, right?
Right.
When does it become something that is no longer avoidable? Um, I think about, for example, let me use the example of my kids' school, right? So
Yeah.
I have three young kids, second graders and a fifth grader. And what was interesting is, this early this school year, they sent out an email that essentially said, "Hey, we recognize that this thing is out there, right? We get it. There's a generative AI platform that anybody can get on. We're trying to figure out what's the best way for us to use that to our advantage to help it with our teaching, to help us make the students, more prepared for the future." That to me is a sign that, if anything, the school system is even recognizing the need for the change. So the change is certainly coming. And I think when you think about how fast or how quickly, I do think it's going to accelerate. Personally, that's just a kind of what I think we're seeing. I mean, gosh, you could like reserve your own robot right here pretty soon to have at your home.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's a pretty incredible shift. So the Jetsons is becoming real.
Yeah.
We're all going to
Yes.
have our own robot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that the pace of change is again right now. You're at a point where if you don't want to get involved, you don't have to. But yet the wave is coming, and so be prepared is essentially the way I view it.
Yeah.
Be
I think it's
excited
so.
though, right? I shouldn't say be prepared as in be scared. I mean, and be prepared as in be excited about it, right? What can you do to try something new today, right? To get involved and
Mm.
check something else out that you never have. It can be very overwhelming. I think that's fair. Right?
Mhm.
I think I was talking with a realtor at a happy hour the other day who made the comment that she just feels so overwhelmed
Mm.
because when she gets on her social media or talks to others, it's just AI this, use this for your images, use this for your
Mm.
videos. What are you not doing it with, and her comment was, my concern is new agents are never going to really learn this business because the AI is going to do it all for them.
Mm.
To me, that's an overstatement, and you got to find the right balance. So, new real estate agents that are not accurately learning everything they should about how to become, excelling in the industry, the real estate industry, because they're just sitting back and letting AI do everything for them, right? That's the pressure she's feeling. So that
Okay.
was my intent.
When you brought that up at coffee, I think that was such an interesting observation that you've got somebody who's a leader in the business, or I'm going to say it
Mhm,
that way,
mhm. Yeah, she is.
who, yep, who isn't concerned about not using AI enough. Because I think that's where a lot of leaders are like, oh my gosh, are we using AI enough in the business for a lot of cases?
Mhm,
Not every case. But you're saying, I think I hear you saying this person is saying, gosh, if my business folks, if my real estate agents depend too much on, and I think this applies to any industry, too much on AI and just take that input output
mhm,
without digesting it, internalizing it, there's a lack of depth to their understanding of the business.
mhm.
And so it actually is decreasing the effectiveness in a way of that person being able to um, be more effective in my business. Is that fair summary of what you were saying?
That's absolutely fair, and I mean, I think you apply the 80/20 rule, right? I mean, most people there may be some outliers that that works for, and that's fine, but if you think about the majority of the time and the cases, that's exactly her concern, and I think to her, the reason she's gotten to where she's been so successful is building the relationships,
Mm,
customer service, doing the right thing for her client, and understanding who they are at their core and what's so important for them. Those aren't necessarily things that you can get, right, from a Gen AI, from an AI.
mm,
Um, I think I think the balance though to her statement is how can you enhance the things you're already doing,
mm,
right? So certainly recognize the need for that human connection, but is there an ability to, just use it to enhance what you're already doing? Because like we've shared, the reality is it could enhance something and others are probably doing it, right? So I think
sure.
it's like you can't live under the rock. I mean, back to
Right.
that analogy.
I would love to. I kind of want to go a couple directions there. I do want to come back to. I think I'm going to be very upfront with our bias. I think you and I are both technologists at heart.
Mhm.
I'm a nerd at heart, and
Big time.
so there is an aspect of where I am excited about. And if you go through the Gallup Strength Finders, or I think it's Clifton Strength Finders, maybe Learner's always been my top one. I've done it multiple times. Learner's top one, um, where I'm like, I like technology. I love learning. This is kind of exciting to me. Yet I will tell you, not all of my emotions are positive. And so you listed off a couple emotions that you're hoping people have of curiosity and excitement. Um, is that a fair representation of all the emotions that you have? You feeling very positive, 100% positive, full curiosity, full excitement. Is that where you're at?
I I would say that's certainly a few of my emotions, but there is an element of the unknown and the the concern. I can't think of the right word, but just sort of the unknown. Yeah, like what could go wrong? You always have to, as a leader, you learn to kind of plan for various scenarios, right? It's just what you have to do to be prepared. And to me, that's certainly something I've been thinking about in this scenario. I think I'm certainly not someone that goes down at the negativity hole.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually not where I go,
Mm-hmm.
or conspiracy theorist type, right? But certainly, my goodness, there's a lot that you could dive into where the fear is there.
Mm-hmm.
What could this mean in terms of, to go all the way to one extreme, like civilization just changing? Could it get to a place where, um, the AI takes over? You gosh, I think movies, you go all the way to like
Yeah.
Terminator in your head or
Yeah.
like the iRobot movie or things like that. But
Right.
certainly, those don't seem too far fetched when you start seeing videos of these robots that are humanoid in form, you know, dancing around and doing things like folding laundry and tasks that humans do today. So I think there's certainly an element of caution. Maybe I'll put it that way. Maybe that's the word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, I think you'd be blind not to have that as a concern. Personally, that's my view. But what about you?
Yeah. I'm at a similar place where I look at some of these technology leaders, and I'll leave them unnamed just because I don't. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. But I look at some of these global leaders and I'm like, are they just trying to recreate movies from their childhood, like the science fiction movies? Is that what we're doing? Is that the path? That's the roadmap. Like I saw iRobot. That's cool. I want to recreate that. I saw Terminator. That would be interesting, you know?
Yeah,
And I'm like,
yeah,
it feels to a degree like the science fiction movies that maybe you and I grew up with, or at least I grew up with. You're like you're
oh
like
yeah, I'm there.
you're like 20, I think, is what you are.
Right,
But
yes, yeah. 29 again this year, yeah.
um, and I'm like, gosh, this feels like somebody's trying to recreate the fantasy world they grew up with, and yet they're making it real, right?
Right.
Um, So I think for me, I'm kind of at an interesting place, and we can maybe get into it a little bit more here as we progress. But I I really hope that the landscape stays competitive. I think competition is important. I think having OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, other AI providers, I think having them compete against themselves is so important for us because I kind of have a little apprehension having grown up with some of these movies, right?
Mhm.
Where is there a future? And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, where all of this becomes unified. And at that point, does it become more about control? And is it using some of these things for control? And so I have a little bit of apprehension in that, like looking way down the road, and I don't know that there's anything that I can do to stop that. But looking way down the road, does something get unified and you have, I look at like North Korea or
Mhm.
something like that. I know what's humanly possible. Um, so I have apprehension about down the road what that looks like. But I'll be honest with you, I can't stop that. And so I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. And that may never come to play. There may always be competition. The way I look at it is like, if that's going to happen, I can tell you between now and then, it's going to be really fun.
There you go.
Is my view. And as a sole proprietor, I have used AI to do so many things, getting my business off the ground, from finances to operations to using agent mode so that I can delegate to my work to something else to actually click and do the work rather than me having to do it myself. And I know that um, brings about some problematic scenarios in kind of more traditional corporate environments. But I can tell you, as somebody who has no team behind me, it's
Mhm,
me.
mhm.
The fact that I can leverage AI as an extension of how I want to run my business has been so helpful.
Yeah, I think if I add to that, Jess, back to your point about being a lifelong learner, I think what's been something I found that I didn't expect to find when I started utilizing AI for my business, and then even personally, my husband and I, for our home life, we'll have certain projects we're doing at home or questions we'll have, right? And we certainly utilize the platform for, I feel like, almost anything. It's kind of like, well, have you asked GPT that yet? Um,
Right.
but what I was gonna say is it's been interesting to me how much I've learned that I didn't expect to learn, even outside of the subject I'm asking it about. You know
Hmm.
what I'm saying? So it's so much different than a traditional Google search because it'll just, it's just an input in, input out, right? Versus this is a little bit of a difference. And I think it's just so unique the way I've been able to get started down a path, or it'll suggest something that'll make me think of something else. So it almost becomes a spider web, right? Like a tree branch of like, oh gosh, I didn't realize you could do that. That makes me think about this thing. Or oh, I didn't know it would do that. So I think from a learning perspective, that's been something that's been very unique to me that I've enjoyed on top of what you shared in terms of just efficiencies.
Yeah. It's it's interesting, right? I've been somebody. If I think about parallels, right? Some of the technologies that's come up in the last, I'm going to throw out 10 years. It's probably been longer, but social media. You say the word social media, and depending on the circles in your experience, you either are like, I don't like social media. I think it's a vice. I think it hurts people and families. I chose to use social media a very specific way in celebrating my connections and celebrating people. And for me, it's been a fantastic way to further those connections and build relationships that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise had. And I can think of several people that are now important in my life, that I only met through social media, and I kind of am applying that mindset to AI. It's like,
Mhm.
how do you want to use it? There are negative uses of AI. There are negative uses of email. There are negative uses of, I mean, you can
Yeah, name it,
anything, right?
right? Name it.
And it's more about what's the human and the heart and the intent behind it. And so I would really like to dive into a little bit more of what does it mean to, um, how is how are parts of humanity going to be um, refocused? And I think there are parts of humanity within the context of AI that historically we've probably taken for granted that is suddenly going to become very important. Um, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's it's inevitable, honestly. I do. I think we talked about this a little bit at our first coffee when we met, and you used this great example that has stuck with me. You shared this example that said, you know, years ago when there were everyone was, or, when we had the industrial revolution or when people were farming, essentially, right? Um, then they weren't sitting at their desk job all day, basically, right? So pre that, um, we didn't have gyms because for the most part, you were getting your activity, your workout was your life. I mean, you were essentially working for your life. You were plowing a field, you were doing all the different things needed to do, and that was your physical activity, and that's what kept you in shape, right? Or from a female, maybe you were keeping the house going, right? So you're constantly on your feet, constantly moving, whatever the case may be versus you kind of shift forward to now we're actually, you know, paying paying to move things around. I think that's how you put it. We're paying to lift weights, right? Which is so funny. And how this importance of like stop sitting on your butt all day, right? And stand and do these things. It's better for your health. And that's not been that long of time if you think about it. In terms
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
to that shift that happened. So um to your point, I think that the next shift that sort of starts to come is, if you fall in line with the theory that says, how can the AI make you better you, right? What does it then free up your time to do? What are you going to do with your time? Right? If you're not folding laundry, if you're not doing the dishes, right? Or if you're not doing the
Yes.
work that you have to do to run your environment, whether that's an entrepreneurial environment or a corporate environment, if there's truly a machine doing that for you, well, then what are you going to do with your time?
Yeah.
Right? And I think people are going to have to kind of rediscover themselves a little bit.
Hmm.
I think, if I use my own self, it's so true, right? We went from, for me, I went from my calendar was booked every day. It was pretty much set for me. Now I find myself in a place where I'm setting my own time. I'm
Hmm.
deciding what's important. I mean, not that I didn't do that in the past, but it's like reconnecting and saying what's super important to me. And now that I have time available, what am I going to do with it? And how am I going to make the most of it?
Hmm.
And how do I ensure I don't let go of relationships? Because that's ultimately, what I think drives us as humans. That's what separates us from the machines.
Hmm.
If you think back to the movies like I, Robot or even the cartoon Wild Robot, I don't know if you've seen that one.
Mm,
It's a cartoon. It came out like last year this time.
okay. Okay.
But ultimately, what happens in the plot of both of those, if you think about it, is the robot becomes more human, and that's what ultimately like saves the movie, right?
Hmm.
So the robot moves from being just a machine and just a robot to caring, to feeling, to building a community, to having these human senses that then end up saving the day. So I just think there's something there, right? That's going to
Hmm.
happen naturally. And what are people going to, again, the question, what are you going to do with all your time?
Yeah. Um, Bridget, this
Yes.
is fantastic. And I knew this was going to happen. We're like
Well,
at
I'm
the
such a
heart of where I
rambler.
wanted to go. And we need to wrap up this episode. So what we're going to do, known through connection audience, is we're going to do a second episode. We're going to continue right from here and carve this up into two episodes. So thank you so much for joining this first part of the conversation. Bridget, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for starting this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we will continue here in episode 11. Thank you so much for joining. If you don't listen to episode 11 right away, please keep connecting. Look for ways to connect with the world around you, yourself. That is how we're known, and that is how we help others be known. So please keep connecting and embrace the human connection, even in this era of change. Thank you. Hi, welcome to episode 10 of Known Through Connection. I'm excited to have Bridget Knaub here. Known Through Connection, shoot. I did exactly what I said I didn't want to do. Okay. I didn't want to introduce you that fast. I'm just so excited you're here.
It's okay.
Let me start over. Space. Okay.